You know, when we think about the laws that govern a country, we usually picture politicians debating in parliament. But honestly, that's only half the story. The laws they write are constantly being interpreted, shaped, and sometimes even saved by the courts. Today, we're going to dive into how these landmark judgments act like a compass, guiding and guarding a nation's most fundamental laws. And we'll start with a question that really tests the limits of democracy itself. So let me ask you something that sounds a little crazy. Could the very people we elect to parliament turn around and vote to get rid of elections altogether? Could they just decide democracy is over? It's not just a wild hypothetical. It's the kind of high-stakes question that forces a nation to figure out what it really stands for. And believe it or not, one incredible court case gave us the final answer.
Okay, so to understand how courts can build these powerful safeguards, we first need to get our heads around a core legal idea, the power of precedent. It's a simple but really profound concept. Basically, court decisions aren't just made up on the spot. They build on each other, creating a stable and predictable legal system. The fancy Latin term for this is stare decisis, which literally just means to abide by things decided. It's the reason the law is consistent. If a court tackles a legal issue one way today, another court facing a similar problem tomorrow should come to the same conclusion. It's what stops the law from being random and builds our trust in the whole system.
And this isn't just some old tradition either. In India, it's baked right into the Constitution. Article 141 makes it official. When the Supreme Court declares what the law is, that's it. That's the final word, and every other court in the country has to follow it. This little article is what sets the stage for the Supreme Court to be the ultimate protector of the Constitution. So this brings us to a huge, monumental conflict. If Parliament can pass laws and even change the Constitution, are there any limits? I mean, can they amend it so much that they change its very soul? This question sparked one of the biggest legal debates in India's history. For years, the answer to that question just kept flip-flopping. Back in 1951, in a case called Shankari Prasad, the Supreme Court said Parliament's power was totally unlimited. It could change anything. But then, just 16 years later, the court did a complete 180. In the Goloknath case, by a super slim 6-5 majority, it said, nope, fundamental rights are off limits. You can't touch them. So this set up a fundamental clash of ideas. On one side, you've got parliamentary supremacy, the belief that the elected body is all-powerful. And on the other, you have constitutional supremacy, the idea that the Constitution is the boss, and everyone, including Parliament, has to obey it. This was an epic tug-of-war, and it was destined for a showdown. And that showdown arrived. It came in the form of one of the most important cases in legal history, not just in India, but anywhere in the world. Kesavananda Bharati versus the state of Kerala. This wasn't just another case. This was the final battle for the very soul of the Indian Constitution. Just to give you an idea of the sheer scale of this thing, 13 judges, the largest bench ever assembled in the history of the Supreme Court, was put together to decide this one single issue. And they did not rush it. The arguments went on for 68 days. Just imagine that. Over 2 months of the most intense legal debate, literally shaping the future of a nation of hundreds of millions. And after all of that, the final decision came down to one single vote, 7-6. The fate of this epic constitutional battle, and really the fate of the Constitution itself, was hanging by a thread. So what came out of this nail-biter? a truly historic and brilliant compromise, the Basic Structure Doctrine. The court basically said, yes, Parliament, you can amend the Constitution, but you can't amend it out of existence. You cannot destroy its core, its fundamental features, its basic structure. And the impact of this decision was just immense. The Basic Structure Doctrine wasn't just a fix for India, it became this celebrated judicial innovation that influenced constitutional law all around the globe. It was a whole new way of thinking about how a constitution can be both flexible enough to change with the times, but also permanent in its core values. So, what exactly is this basic structure? Well, the court was pretty smart about it. It didn't give a final, exhaustive list. Instead, it pointed to these core pillars, things like the supremacy of the Constitution itself, a democratic government, secularism, the separation of powers, all the big stuff. These are the load-bearing walls of the entire constitutional building. You can't knock them down. Now, this doctrine wasn't just some beautiful legal theory that sat on a shelf. Oh no, it quickly became a real-world shield for democracy, and its strength got tested almost immediately. A huge test came in 1994 with the S.R. Bommai case. For years, this thing called Article 356 was used like a political weapon. It let the central government just dismiss state governments run by opposition parties. The court finally stepped in, used the Basic Structure Doctrine, and said that this was unconstitutional because it attacks the country's federal character, another one of those pillars. This verdict was absolutely crucial. It cemented two key ideas, secularism and federalism, as non-negotiable parts of the basic structure. The doctrine had proven its worth, not as a theory, but as a powerful, real-life guardian against political power grabs. But hey, the impact of these landmark judgments isn't just about high-level constitutional debates. These decisions have a direct ripple effect that shapes criminal law and protects the rights of every single one of us in very real ways. Take the famous Kesavananda Bharati case. Picture this. A decorated naval officer finds out his wife is having an affair, and he kills her lover. Was it a premeditated, cold-blooded murder, or was it a crime of passion? The court had to draw the line, and the reasonable man test it came up with is still used today to figure out the difference between murder and culpable homicide. And here's a wild consequence of that case. It was so high profile, with the media going crazy and massive public sympathy for the officer, that it made people seriously question if a jury could ever be impartial in that kind of situation. Get this. This one single dramatic case led to the end of the entire jury system in India. The courts have also laid down practical rules to protect us. The Supreme Court was really alarmed by constant reports of police brutality, so in the D.K. Basu case, it did something extraordinary. It didn't just condemn the practice, it created a mandatory checklist for every single arrest. Things like the officer has to wear ID, someone has to be informed, you have a right to a lawyer. These guidelines are a direct shield against the abuse of power. And what about when you try to report a crime and the police just won't listen? For decades, that was a huge, frustrating roadblock to getting justice. Well, the Lalita Kumari verdict changed that. It made it mandatory for police to register a first information report, or an FIR, for serious offenses. It makes sure the wheels of justice can't just be stopped at the police station door. So, from stopping Parliament from canceling elections to making sure your rights are protected during an arrest, these judgments show a judiciary that is actively guarding the law. And that brings us to one final big question. The basic structure isn't a dusty old list from 1973, it's a living, breathing idea. So as our society keeps changing, what fundamental principle do you think the courts are going to need to protect next?